This is the Plated Traditions channel. Welcome to the Plated Traditions channel. With your host Kendra Moses. This is the Plated Traditions channel. Welcome to the Plated Traditions channel. With your host Kendra Moses. This is the Plated Traditions channel.
The meaning of food. It's a lot. Meanings. These are things formed by words that are formed by letters, continuously moving. Before we continue on to our next portion of the meaning of food, I thought it'd be best to have a slight recap of what we've covered thus far. Generic terminology and loose translations.
My cooking doesn't taste the same. Oh no.
To start with the meaning of food, I want to focus on the concept of food names or classification. Now, to reiterate, this is not a verbatim definition of a food or dish, nor are we going to enter the realm about the debate of authenticity when it comes to different cultural and regional foods from around the world. This is more about the general food communication, like basically how we do our everyday speech in regards to explaining what a food item is and how this comes about. Because when you're experiencing food on a global level and you're wanting to try and educate yourself about the different types of foods and techniques from all over the world, the more sincere and dedicated that you become to this task, the more it starts settling into your basic knowledge and understanding and recollection. And this is a great thing. This is something that I believe you should want to really aspire to do, especially if you have a deep interest in the culinary arts. It's not impossible and it's not hard to come across different foods from different regions and countries, no matter where you are. And what tends to happen with this is that the translation changes. And sometimes the translation changes because of people interpreting things in a more generic term, or that other cultures may have decided to make things easier on the people who they are now sharing their food with, who are now accustomed to their type of food. They need a more basic understanding, so they give it a more generic name or a generic understanding, which ends up becoming the new food item's name. I found that a lot of people who come over with their foreign cuisine, they end up slightly changing the translation as far as being more lenient to something being called a pork roll when it may be a pork bowl. This is where you start to see the translation breakdown in regards to food meanings and what a dish is when it comes to food that has been inspired from overseas. The translations become more looser. Personal interpretation. And we do this for other things, like our differentiations for the naming for the foods that we eat for a certain time of day. Now, typically we all worldwide have a rendition in which we call breakfast, lunch, and dinner. There is usually a differentiation or a categorization of specific foods that are consumed at a certain time of day, or that are expected to be consumed at a certain time of day. So we do this so much for so many different things that if someone were to eat pancake and eggs and bacon at 8 o'clock at night, there are certain type of reactions they would be confronted with. Whether or not they feel it's anyone else's business or not, whether or not it is. That's another topic of contention as well. But we just focus on having someone eating, like I said, what we consider breakfast food at night during dinner. There is a petition about that, about do they know what they're doing? Why are they eating breakfast food at that time of day? But these are things that we do in regards to the meaning of food. We take certain things, generic names like we discussed last week, loose translations like we discussed last week, and we take certain things like categorizations that we have made in our own cultures and our own lands, like having, like I said, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And if you eating a steak at 8 o'clock in the morning with mashed potatoes and string beans, why are you eating like that first thing in the morning? There will be questions, because that is what we've done to ourselves. We made the meaning of food so complex that even our regular day-to-day things could be so easily scrutinized just based by a time of day. So it's an interesting thing how tradition can become so embedded in us, along with what we consider the meaning of food to be, because the meaning of food goes beyond the definition terms. And this week we're moving on with the meaning of food, focusing on official food naming and execution. What does it mean when a dish's official name is used? What is expected when a dish's name is used? Today, our focus will be on case subject, the Italian carbonara. We'll be focusing on the name meaning and expectation. Please refer to our recipe card. Now, continuing with the case subject of the Italian carbonara, we will then move on to our name, meaning, and execution. Alright, hello class, let's get started. First, do you have your guanciale? Have you cut your guanciale into small pieces to pan fry? No, I'm afraid not. I know, it all comes from a pig. So essentially, guanciale and bacon are the same thing. No. Bacon and guanciale are processed and or cured in different manners. This changes what it means and what's expected in an Italian carbonara. Moving on, eggs. What do we do next? Very good. Quick note. While the act of egg yolk separation differs by the cook, a clean separation is the most important part. We want yolks only. Let's proceed. Is the following step a part of the Italian carbonara process? Correct. Italian carbonara does have a creamy texture, but no milk or cream. The egg yolks give the dish its creamy texture. Now, what will you add to your egg yolks? Yes, and don't forget some of the guanciale fat that you saved earlier. You think it's time to cook our pasta? We're looking for an al dente texture, making sure to reserve a little of your drained pasta water. Now, let's bring it all together. Now, working fairly quickly, place your drained pasta into a bowl with your seasoned egg yolks. Add a splash of your pasta water and toss. Add your cooked guanciale and your pecorino romano. Then buon appetito. You have the true meaning of an Italian carbonara. I hail from a family of manual laborers. I'm a manual laborer. As soon as I leave this camera, I have to go haul and lift and tote things up to 100 pounds repeatedly. within the course of 8 hours. And that's just for the work day. That's nothing to do what I may have to do once I leave the job. It's just continuous because I come from a family of manual laborers. And so this is our way of life. We have to do things that we have to do regardless of a time clock or not. And this is something that's necessary, especially if I want to do simple things like eat. And this is, I know it's not isolated incidents. This is not exclusive to just my family. And these are the things that many people have to do. And that's why I also see plate traditions as being classified as a legacy. Because when you don't come from a lot, opulence-wise, especially in a society in which that's where your greatest value is ascertained by how much money, how much wealth, how much property you have, how much food you can just store on a table, whether you eat it or not. So when these things are not something that you possess, but when you're able to put in the work, to put in the time, and then still say, I can sit down and eat, or I can sit down with my family and we can all be fed. That's something I consider to be a legacy, because these things are the things that were passed down. Because if my ancestors did not have this train of thought, this way of being, what might have I been? I believe in personal choice for a lot of things, especially for your basic way of living. I don't have this conception that most have, that if you don't have a certain type of, I guess, demographic, or a certain type of family, or a certain type of what have you, there's many reasons, too many reasons for me to sit here and recount. I don't believe that necessarily bars your actual potential in life. It would make it more difficult. It would make it more trying, possibly. But as coming from a family of laborers, it wasn't something to be given. It was something to earn. And I believe that all of us have that responsibility of having to earn it, whether we wanted to have that particular responsibility or not. It becomes something that's a way of life. That's basically it. We were from a species that lived off the land long ago, to making a world in which it costs a lot of money. We have our societal systems, and some may work harder than others as far as labor. So this is where we are now. So this ends up being a part of the legacy that we pass down to the future generations, like we gathered from the generations before ourselves. You don't come from a background of a particular level of opulence, and where it's never been a question whether or not you will be fed, because there's always a resource there. There's always food there. When you basically know that your whole livelihood is dependent on how much you put into it, and how much that you try to save with the assistancy as someone would with their mansion. But when you have that same level of assistancy to save, I don't know, a pound of grains, because you know that's it for you. That's what you have to work with. And when that's all that you have to work with, you do everything you can to keep it alive and nourish it. And not only just the tangible nature of the grain, but the knowledge of the labor that went into it, to sowing the field, if that was the case, or to making sure how you obtained it, how you earned it. All this becomes necessary knowledge that's ingrained in you, that becomes a part of your very being. So not only does that pound of grain becomes that thing that you're seeking to nourish and protect, is that knowledge, so you know how to do this again. That knowledge is something else that you seek to nourish and protect. And that's why I understand the national pride behind the food and dishes around the world that people have when we make something a certain way and we still call it loosely this or that, and it's not necessarily the authentic way. We're mainly making something else completely different and giving it the same name because of the subtle similarities in its appearances. And it's not as petty and nitpicking as some might say. It's something because, like I said, a lot of recipes, a lot of things that we do today, a lot of our language and everything that came from times where there wasn't a stipend made, nobody was paid. It was something that these people did in order to survive, in order to make something palatable, in order to make something enjoyable, to make that a part of their life that isn't a strain on their life, but a value and an asset to their lives. So a lot of recipes and a lot of foods that were either built or made from actual mistakes, like being left out in the sun, or those subtle peculiarities of, like I said, everyday living. But you know what they did with these things? Once they developed it, once they discovered that this will happen if it's in this climate or in this environment, they remembered that information. They kept that knowledge and they protected it and they nourished it. And when it came to the time, they recorded it. And in recording it, they repassed it on. So it's not only just a recipe, it's a part of a legacy that became a part of a tradition. These things became interchangeable with one another because these things came to be because they were all connected to one another. So when we may get a little taken aback by a different region saying, no, you did not make that because you did not use any of the ingredients, or you added a peculiar ingredient to something. We do not do that. That's not authentic, and that's not what we call such and such. It is important, and you may still do it anyway because that's your right in your kitchen. And that's the way you like it. That's your plate of traditions. So plate of traditions is not arguing with that point of fact. It's just that the understanding behind why things are and why people feel certain ways is a certain level of empathy that you have for basically anything, even down to the simplicity of what we call food. Being empathetic doesn't always have to be this massive event that has a lot of negative connotations. You can just learn to have a certain level of empathy for, like I said, someone's pride and honor in something that took a lot to be developed, and it took a lot to have this origin story. And this is where they come from. This is who they are. So that what makes it important to them. So while you don't necessarily have to understand completely, you can still understand the fact that this is their level of pride. And that's why they prefer the dish, if you're going to call it by that name, to be executed in that authentic fashion. Because it's no different than yourself. For your name. When I was growing up, I was taught that my name's supposed to be the most important asset I have. And it's not because my surname is in the Bible. It's not because my sister picked my first name. It's not even because my grandmother had the tradition of making sure that we had my middle name passed down to the females in our family. It was very important to her. So even with all that having significance, it's not because of that. The significance of my name is supposed to be for what I put into it. What I developed the association with my name and being to be in regards into how I act and how I end up being valued. Because being from a working class family or being from a planet where everyone is experiencing hardships in some form or fashion, they're either doing it now or have done so. It's something for many people that's unavoidable. It's a rare utopian or fairy tale story for any of us. But the importance of my name and giving it value based on how I live and how it's associated with the person that I am verbatim, is that it's the only thing I truly own in this life and that I ever would truly own in this lifetime. And that's the same meaning and impact in my eyes as many people feel about the execution of and the calling out of names for certain things, especially as something, as people say, it's just a recipe. Well, I don't see why it's so important. That's why I understand it to be so important. Because if you call something by a name and it's been associated with something, and that something has been developed over time, it has an origin, and it's the only thing that you truly own. Even though we're in a world where it's billions of years old, and yet we still think we own real estate in it. So much so that we fight each other for territories. But the reality is, we own very little in this world. So I do not hold it against anyone if I so happen to make a recipe and because I didn't have an ingredient, I substitute it out, and they might say, you did not make that. It doesn't matter if it still tasted the same or what have you. I understand if that's where it's coming from, that feeling of it not being authentic. And maybe I should call it a somewhat like, or a facade of, or what have you, when terminology may have to change. Experimentation can still happen, and I don't even believe that people are even fighting against the experimentation process. I don't believe people are even fighting against you trying to learn about their culture and their traditions or trying to execute their dishes. It just comes to a point in time where the tradition becomes so important, because that's the only thing that we all truly own. Just like our name. Thank you again for joining us for another week. We hope to see you again next time. Bye-bye.